Before the first coin flip, before the first kickoff, you just gotta check out the Sideline Sizzle with the youngest sports commentator in American radio. Here's Tristan Blackman with the Sideline Sizzle.
Welcome to another edition of the Sideline Sizzle, brought to you by the City of Conway Parks and Recreation Department. We have been covering each NFL team's schedule for the upcoming 2023 regular season, going division by division. Last week we looked at the NFC South, and today we'll wrap things up by taking a look at the final division, the AFC South. We'll dive into each team's schedule game by game, but first, we've got some news to cover. With training camp here, we catch a glimpse of how each team is shaping up for the 2023 regular season. Some teams are looking good, others not so much. Sadly, with training camp comes injuries. In fact, a lot of injuries. We haven't even reached our first preseason game yet, and one of the league's best quarterbacks is already down with an injury that could rule him out for quite some time. As of several days ago, Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow is expected to miss, quote, several weeks after suffering a calf injury. This was a non-contact injury if I'm not mistaken, but it's still super unfortunate for a player like Burrow looking to maybe push for a Super Bowl this year. He's also coming off of a season where he was a name that popped up several times in MVP discussions and has consistently been a top QB in this league following his initial injury that he suffered to his ACL during his rookie season. Now, the media is tearing this story up. A lot of people throwing out the concept that the Bengals are doomed, and that simply isn't the case. Head coach Zach Taylor simply stated that Burrow would miss several weeks. That wasn't an indication that he'd miss several weeks of the regular season, but rather several weeks in general. There's also reports coming out of the Bengals locker room that Joe Burrow was actually walking around the locker room without a limp, wearing nothing on his calf but a compression sleeve. In my opinion, Burrow's injury is a cause for concern, but I don't think it's any reason for fans, or any media outlets for that matter, to speak on this like they're experts on the injury. Burrow doesn't seem too fazed by this injury, and I'm sure to him it's just a minor setback. There's a very real possibility that Burrow is good to go by week 1, and I think at worst, Burrow will miss a handful of games to open the season. Moving on to other injuries, Buccaneers rookie defensive lineman Kalijah Kancey seems to have suffered a very similar injury to his calf. Similar to Burrow, Kancey is expected to miss a good bit of time with the team during practice and training camp, but he should be good to go for 2023, barring good news from his MRI. Honing in now on the Broncos training camp, wide receiver trouble in Denver, as usual. Fourth-year wideout KJ Hamler was recently waived after he made it public that he was encountering difficulties with a heart condition. Hamler announced the news on his Instagram account that he would be departing from the team. His message was seen less as a goodbye and more of a see you soon, as Hamler is expected to recover from this condition following his treatment. I'm not going to pronounce the condition that he has because it's simply just too hard for me to even try to say, but it's actually a common heart condition that a lot of people recover from without receiving treatment apparently. So, all things considered, Hamler will be okay, and the possibility of him returning to Denver is pretty likely. Keeping the Denver Broncos wide receiver trend going, the Broncos also suffered a tragic loss this past week during training camp. Wide receiver Tim Patrick, who was sidelined all of last season due to an ACL injury, was anticipating a big comeback season in 2023. However, during practice last week, Patrick suffered a non-contact injury to his Achilles, and the word is that he actually tore his Achilles. This will sit Patrick out for a second consecutive season, and the once reliable wide receiver is now struggling to stay on the field. This is another season where Denver has suffered some sort of loss to their receiving core, with Jerry Jeudy having suffered injuries before, Courtland Sutton tearing his ACL in 2021, Tim Patrick this past year, and now this season. The list goes on, and the Broncos really need to reconsider their conditioning strategies because they aren't working. In fact, they haven't been working for the past 6 years, where this team suffers injuries to practically their entire roster each and every season. Patrick's season was officially cut short this past Wednesday after Denver placed him on the injured reserve list yet again. Patrick is 29 years old, coming up on 30, and in my eyes, his return to football is doubtful if he can't get a grip. I know these types of injuries are tragic and obviously not something a player intends to happen, but at this point, I think it's getting out of hand. The more positive news, football is back, officially back, this week, as the Cleveland Browns and New York Jets met in Canton, Ohio for the annual Hall of Fame game this past Thursday. This was basically a preseason game, and we will break down some of the key moments from various players who participated in this matchup. This game was honestly not that bad. The Jets had a strong start, and it was Zach Wilson who was starting in this game for them at quarterback. Again, this was a preseason game. It doesn't really matter who wins or loses, and in all honesty, I don't think it really says a lot about where each team stands for 2023. However, I will say, backup quarterback Kellen Mond for the Browns didn't look very good to me. If you watch the highlights of this game, well, for Kellen Mond, there aren't any. He had a decent throw, which was almost intercepted, but it wasn't, and then the receiver dropped it. Sort of a weird play. When Kellen Mond came out of the game for the Browns, though, rookie quarterback out of UCLA, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who I've spoken about on this show before, also known as DTR, played great. Not only did he do a great job scrambling and passing, but you won't believe this, he was a great blocker too. Yes, a quarterback laying out blocks for his players. On one of the Browns' touchdowns in the third quarter, the running lane got stuffed and the back had to cut to the right side, and the only blocker there was DTR. And this guy lowered the shoulder and nearly landed a pancake block on the defender, leading to an impressive rushing touchdown for Cleveland. He also had a passing touchdown in this game. Nothing crazy, just a little slant route, but Robinson threw a dart directly to his receiver, who took it in the end zone. From this point on, the game pretty much stalled out, and it became much more of a defensive battle, and one that the Browns were capable of winning. Cleveland, who was once down 13-0 in this game, bounced back with help from Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and they won the Hall of Fame game with a score of 21-16. I'll dive into my predictions for the AFC South in 2023, going team by team and game by game. The first team we'll look at in this division is none other than the Houston Texans. The Texans were arguably the worst team in the NFL last season, even though they didn't quite finish with the worst record. Among the very few amount of wins they achieved, one of them came against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are likely playoff contenders up to this point. This team is capable of pulling off an upset win here and there, but nothing more in my opinion. I just don't think the Texans have the necessary talent to compete right now, but after this past draft, they certainly have the correct pieces in place. CJ Stroud could turn out to be an excellent quarterback, and Will Anderson Jr. off the edge is a deadly threat who should be a day one difference maker. While I don't see the Texans doing very well in 2023, I do see this team having success down the road if they play their cards right. So, starting in Week 1, the Texans will face the Ravens, who should have no trouble beating them. That'll be their first of many losses this season, but in Week 2, they face the Colts at home. This is a game I think Houston has a chance at winning. I think whatever is going on between Jonathan Taylor and the Colts ownership, it could get ugly for this team. Plus, I don't know how Anthony Richardson will adapt to being thrust into this lineup early, assuming that is the case. Give me the Texans here in Week 2 with a win. Now from this point on, it gets a bit depressing for this Texans team. I actually have them going on a 5-game losing streak. In Week 3, they face the Jaguars, which will be a loss more than likely. Then Week 4 is a game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, which should result in another loss. Week 5 could be a toss-up if Atlanta isn't performing at their best, but I think the Falcons will win here. The Texans then face the Saints at home in Week 6, but this is a game I think they will lose as well. Following their Week 7 bye week, the Texans transition into a game against the Panthers in Week 8. My bet is that they'll lose this game unless the Panthers with Bryce Young are somehow a worse team than before. Now in Week 9, the Texans finally snag a win against the Buccaneers, who I have less faith in this season than most other teams. Houston could definitely lose this game if Baker Mayfield revitalizes his career in Tampa, but I doubt it. Week 10, Houston faces the Bengals, and that should quite obviously be a loss. They will bounce back in Week 11, though, when they take on the Arizona Cardinals. I think it goes without saying how bad the Cardinals will be this season, that even the Texans are likely to beat this team. But don't get me wrong, the Texans are also awful, so maybe Arizona wins this one. I then have the Texans getting a huge win in Week 12 against the Jaguars. Yes, the Jaguars. In all honesty, I don't actually have faith that they'll win this game. I just think an upset will occur this season. When you've got 2 chances to take down the Jaguars rather than just 1, their odds of beating them at least once are surely there, right? The Jaguars should win here, but I feel like CJ Stroud could have a good game against a good team. After their success in Week 12, the Texans fall back to their losing ways for a brief period, as I have them going on a 5-game losing streak. Week 13, they face my Denver Broncos and will lose that game. Week 14, They take on the Jets. Should be another loss, as New York will likely be gearing into playoff mode. Then in Week 15, the Texans face the Tennessee Titans, whom I have them losing to initially. Then, Week 16, the Texans battle the Browns, another matchup against their former franchise quarterback Deshaun Watson. In Week 17, they will pick up a win against the Titans after that loss to the Browns. I think it being at home for them, the Texans will be able to take down the Titans. I do not think Tennessee will be the same team we have seen in previous seasons, but I will get to that when we cover their schedule. And to close things out in Week 18, the Texans will take on the Colts once more, this time losing. If Anthony Richardson is given an opportunity to start, I think by this point he will have found his footing and take the Texans by storm here. And with this win, the Texans will finish their season with just 5 wins and 12 losses. I think the Texans have the potential going forward, but good things are just not likely to come this season. Texans fans know that. They should know that. They just need to let their guys develop as they continue to rebuild. They're in a rebuilding period. CJ Stroud will probably struggle under this offense and the first-year head coach DeMeco Ryans, but that's to be expected. There aren't very many weapons that come to mind with this Texans offense outside of running back Dameon Pierce, who Houston will probably lean on frequently this season. So, all in all, don't expect much from this team in 2023. You've been listening to the Sideline Sizzle, brought to you by the City of Conway Parks and Recreation Department. After covering the Texans, we have 3 more teams in the AFC South to look at. We've got that coming up right after this.
We're talking football. You got a problem with that? This is the Sideline Sizzle.
Back to the Sideline Sizzle, brought to you by the City of Conway Parks and Recreation Department. We have been taking a look at the AFC South Division, looking at each team's schedule for 2023. Last segment, we covered the Houston Texans. Now we'll take a look at the remaining 3 teams in the division, starting with the Indianapolis Colts. A less than ideal season last year. I was convinced that Matt Ryan would be a difference maker, and this team with Jonathan Taylor would go places. I couldn't have been more wrong. Their offense was terrible, their defense was lackluster at times, and Frank Reich was the scapegoat and got fired before he could even finish the season. This Colts team is just a bit of a wreck right now, and they were last season, having to hire former offensive lineman Jeff Saturday as their interim head coach. Want to tank for a high draft pick? Hire Jeff Saturday halfway through your season. I'm disappointed mostly in the ownership that's been managing this team. Jim Irsay, the owner, is seen by many as delusional. Did you know he has his own band? That's right, he's a country artist supposedly, and his band goes by the name of the Jim Irsay Collection. I wonder which band member came up with that name. Anyway, when Irsay isn't busy rocking out at Lucas Oil Stadium with his guitar buddies, he's probably sending strange and confusing tweets on his Twitter account. On his X account. Thanks, Elon Musk. Star running back Jonathan Taylor recently arranged a meeting with Colts owner Jim Irsay, looking to discuss his contract and the waning running back market. Running backs are so undervalued that top players, who in some cases make up the entire team's offense, are significantly underpaid. Now, I know that these players make millions and millions of dollars, and I understand everyone shouting that these guys need to just shut up and play. But I do think the state of the running back market is a bit ridiculous, and while these guys do make millions, I think in comparison to the rest of the league who also makes millions, they deserve more. Anyway, let's dive into the Colts' schedule, who are at risk of losing Jonathan Taylor if this contract situation isn't resolved. At least they've got Anthony Richardson at quarterback, who I guess they think will make up for the lack of a running game that the Colts will have without Jonathan Taylor. So, starting off in Week 1, the Colts take on the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I think the Jaguars easily win here. Week 1, Jacksonville is poised to be a good team this season, and I don't think the Colts will take them down. Moving on to Week 2, the Colts go on the road to face the Texans, and with it being a road game, I have them losing here. We still don't know who will be the starting quarterback for this team in 2023, whether it will be Minshew or Richardson. I don't know. What I do know is that the Texans, playing at home early, will have a decent opportunity to beat the Colts here, which I think they will capitalize on. In Week 3, the Colts take on the Ravens, which should be a loss. Like the Jaguars, Baltimore is poised to be a really good team who shouldn't have trouble taking down the Colts. In Week 4, the Colts play the Los Angeles Rams, and this week I think they do pick up a win. The Rams suffered some losses to free agency and trades in the offseason without really hauling in an adequate amount of talent in return. Not to mention they were bad last year, so with an arguably worse roster than last year, Los Angeles might lose this game. Moving on to Week 5, the Colts will take a loss to the Titans here. I think Tennessee is a better team than a lot of people give them credit for, but brace for impact anyway because my prediction is harsh for them coming up. Anyway, I think they have a stout defense with just too many question marks on their offense. Their offensive line needs help, and they desperately need a quarterback. DeAndre Hopkins was a big pickup, but I don't know how involved he can get when they still have the same crappy quarterback situation. I do think the Titans are capable of beating the Colts here in Week 5, though. Then in Week 6, the Colts take another loss to the Jaguars. I think the Jaguars will take at least one loss to either the Colts or Texans. Here, for me, I have the Texans being the ones to do it. In all honesty, the Colts might be the more prepared team and are better on paper, but I have Jacksonville sweeping them this season. The Colts will then face the Browns in Week 7, whom I have them losing to, simply because the Browns could really be looking at a bounce-back season. I know my prediction for Cleveland was harsh, but that's because their success is banking on Deshaun Watson's success. If he doesn't take a step up, neither will this team, especially considering the level of competition in their division, a division in which Cleveland sits at the bottom, as usual. The Colts will find some hope in Week 8 as they get a bit of an upset win against the Saints. Recently, I've expressed my doubts about New Orleans and their head coach. He isn't incompetent, but I definitely would prefer having Sean Payton back. I think this will be one of those games where he shows his true colors and causes the Saints to take a loss in Week 8 against this Indy team. Weeks 9 and 10 fall just before the Colts bye week, and I have them losing both of those games as they face the Patriots followed by the Panthers. I think both these teams are capable of taking down the Colts with relative ease. Following the bye week, Indianapolis will really start to get back on track. I'm a believer in the bye week, and I think getting a week to rest and assess where you are as a team can work wonders for a season. I don't think the Colts will be great after this Week 11 bye or anything, but I do think they'll be stronger when they return. Also, with it being late in the season, Anthony Richardson will hopefully have settled in a little bit to this point, assuming he is the starter, and will be a huge factor in the Colts getting back on track. So, in Week 11, I have the Colts taking down the Buccaneers, which should be an easy team to beat, assuming Baker Mayfield is leading the charge. Following that win, the Colts pick up another win, this time against the Tennessee Titans. The Colts are then tasked with two tricky games back-to-back as they take on the Bengals in Week 14 and the Steelers in Week 15. I have them losing both of those matchups. Then I do think the Colts rebound a little bit and snag a hard-fought win against the Falcons in Week 16. Now, Week 17, they play the Raiders, a team who they managed to beat last year. I would like to go on record and say that I believe this is a toss-up game. It could go either way. For me personally, this game is leaning in favor of the Colts, but I actually have the Raiders winning this one. In all honesty, I just have a feeling the Raiders will win this time around. It just seems right. Then again, they managed to lose to this team when Jeff Saturday was the coach, so at this point, I don't even know. To close things out though in Week 18, I have the Colts picking up a win against the Houston Texans, ending the season at home in Indianapolis. All things considered, not a bad season. Well, actually, it is a bad season, but based on my prediction, I'd say this is around their ceiling. I don't think Anthony Richardson can really fix the fact that this team has significant holes on their roster. The Colts are definitely in a rebuild period, and if they can get around 6 or so wins, I consider it a good season for them. So by their standards, this wouldn't be that bad, and I think the Colts finishing with a final record of 6-11 is appropriate in my eyes. The next team we're looking at is the Jacksonville Jaguars. It feels a bit strange calling this team a playoff contender again, but it's happening. Trevor Lawrence has delivered this team from darkness and brought them back to life. At one point, this team was capable. They managed to make it to the AFC Championship game, and that was with Blake Bortles leading the charge. At that time, Jacksonville's defense was the highlight of this team, but it appears the script has been flipped as those Clemson boys, Lawrence and Etienne, have really excelled on this team. With Calvin Ridley coming off of his suspension, as well as other weapons like Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, and more, this team has talent. Their offensive line took a bit of a hit, but I think Lawrence will be okay. Defensively, they're not without talent either. They've got playmakers on that side of the football, just not nearly as many as they had back in 2017. Could we see the Jaguars make it to the AFC Championship this year? Maybe even the Super Bowl? Let's not go that far. How about we dive into my schedule predictions and then talk about the playoffs? Based on the record I gave Jacksonville for 2023, they should be in. Starting off in Week 1, the Jaguars face the Indianapolis Colts. It's a road game, so maybe this team struggles early on, but I have the Jaguars winning this one fairly easily. The Jaguars open the season with hopefully an easy win, but their second game here in Week 2 is quite the challenge as they take on the Kansas City Chiefs. They met the Chiefs during last year's playoffs in the divisional round and actually kept the game pretty close, but to be fair, Patrick Mahomes played that game on one leg, so I'm not counting it. I don't think Jacksonville is quite strong enough to handle the Chiefs quite yet, so I have them losing here in Week 2. The Jaguars do have it pretty easy being in the AFC South, so following this tough game, they have an easy matchup against the Texans. They should win this game unless the Texans pull an upset, which, if you heard the last segment, I think could happen. Realistically, the Jaguars could get tripped up or just have an off game, but I think on paper, they are better in nearly every way than Houston. Week 4, the Jaguars take on the Falcons, whom I have them beating. Then in Week 5, they play the Bills, and this will be a tough game for them, no doubt. I don't think they will struggle as much in this game as they will be battling the Chiefs, but I don't see them winning here. Moving on to Week 6, the Jaguars will get a win against the Colts once more before taking another loss to the New Orleans Saints in Week 7. I think the Jaguars are clearly the better team than the Saints, but I think after an easy win against the Colts, Jacksonville might get caught napping a little bit and could fall to this team. In Week 8, they get a good competitive win against the Steelers just before heading into the bye week in Week 9. Following the bye week, I have the Jaguars pulling off a massive win against the 49ers in Week 10. Again, huge believer in the bye week here. Given a chance to rest up and prep for a big game, Jacksonville will be on their toes, they should be ready, and I think they can upset the 49ers here. Not to mention, the Jaguars will be at home for this game, so hopefully their crowd is pumped. I've actually been to a Jaguars game before, and even though they lost, they were still super loud and pumped up, and that was back when they were still in tank mode. I think the Jaguars can surprise a lot of teams out there right now, and while I think their offense is the highlight of this team, their defense is sneakily pretty good as well. So after a huge win against the Niners, who I think could win the NFC this year, the Jaguars pick up a win against the Titans at home in Week 11. And after a surge of momentum, the Jaguars will slack off a little bit in Weeks 12 and 13. I have them taking an upset loss to the Texans in Week 12 before losing to the Bengals in Week 13. I think the Bengals will be a top team in the AFC and should outgun the Jaguars, so that sort of goes without saying, but for the Texans, this game could end up being a loss for them. I think the Jaguars will lose some winnable games this year, and an easy match against the Texans could be one. The Jaguars then go on a tear after suffering those two tough losses. Week 14, I have the Jaguars taking down the Browns, followed by a win against another NFC North opponent in the Ravens. Even if Deshaun Watson is playing well, I have faith the Jaguars can beat Cleveland, and for the Ravens, they struggle with injuries, might get caught off guard, especially considering this is a road game for them. Then in weeks 16 and 17, the Jaguars will face the Buccaneers, followed by the Panthers, two teams the Jaguars are capable of beating. And sadly, to close out the season, I have the Jaguars losing in Week 18 to the Titans, but my philosophy is fairly simple. I think to this point, the Jaguars will have clinched the division, probably not eligible for any higher of a seed in the AFC, and they may rest some starters. The game won't carry any weight, so I think the Titans have an opportunity to win against the Jaguars' backups. If starters aren't benched in this game, then I think Tennessee still has what it takes to sort of upset this Jaguars team. And then with that, I have the Jaguars closing the season with 11 wins and just 6 losses. Pretty great improvement from last season, and if they carry the momentum that they brought into our most recent postseason, I think this team will be dangerous. Don't sleep on Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars this year, because when it's all said and done, this team could win as many as 12 or 13 games this season. I do think 11 wins is more realistic though, and I have no doubts the Jaguars will win the division this year because our next team in the Titans are not all they're cracked up to be. Like I mentioned, our next and final team to look at in the AFC South is the Tennessee Titans. I am fully aware that the Titans picked up DeAndre Hopkins, and I actually made these schedule predictions a month or two ago. Guess what? I'm not changing them because I don't think the Hopkins signing will change very much at all. The Titans still have holes on their defense, which I must admit is a decent unit. Their offensive line is not great, their receiving core could use a little more consistency outside of Hopkins, and don't get me started on their quarterback situation. Right now, Ryan Tannehill is likely the starter and hasn't been good since he initially broke out back when he replaced Marcus Mariota. Malik Willis, the quarterback they drafted to replace Tannehill in the third round of last year's draft, looks like a total bust, and reports were leaked several months ago that he might not even make the final 53-man roster. They also drafted Will Levis early in the second round of this most recent draft class, and they actually had to trade up in order to get him. I think Tennessee is the perfect fit for Levis, however, I'm a bit doubtful of the guy. Seeing as though it is unlikely he is the starting quarterback to begin the season in 2023, Tennessee will probably be rolling with Tannehill. The guy plays like a backup. He's just good enough to where he'll beat out any rookie in training camp, but so awful that you want to get rid of him as soon as possible. The worst part is that the Titans gave him a massive contract moments before he decided to play like a bum. So Tannehill got his money and decided, I'm never going to play well again. So the Titans are overpaying an awful quarterback, and outside of Derrick Henry and I guess the newly acquired DeAndre Hopkins, there is no offense. With that in mind, I also don't think this team improved very much outside of Hopkins. I haven't been watching Tennessee very much and don't know how active they've been in the offseason, but I've got a feeling they can do better. The Titans should just rebuild at this point. It's absurd. This team has been a group of mediocre underdogs for years at this point. Right when it seemed like they would give things up and throw in the towel to start rebuilding, they bring in Hopkins as if they are Super Bowl contenders. Newsflash, they are not. Their defense is good, but not Super Bowl good. Not without a dynamic offense, something they haven't had since Warren Moon. Yikes, I didn't mean to get so personal. That was a low blow. So, let's dive into this Titans schedule and show my thoughts on how they'll do. Just warning, I am sleeping on the Titans this season if you couldn't tell. Week 1, I actually have this team starting off with a bang against the Saints. To put things in perspective, the 49ers lost to the Bears last season, which ended the season with the worst record, while the Niners were one game away from the Super Bowl. So to start the season, even the best of teams will slip up. Just because your team wins in Week 1 doesn't mean they will consistently win from then on. Look at Denver. They usually win during Week 1, and look how they turned out. So after getting a good win in Week 1, the Titans will then go on a 3-game losing streak. In my defense, they play the Chargers in Week 2, which is a loss, followed by the Browns and Bengals. I think the Titans actually match up well against the Browns in some regards, but Cleveland outguns them by far, especially if Deshaun Watson returns to full form. Week 5, the Titans pick up a win against the Colts, which will be a road win for them, as the Titans always love those road wins. However, they then will take a tough loss to a team who used to be their rival. Maybe they are still rivals, I don't know. And this team is the Baltimore Ravens. The Titans get a bye week in Week 7, and I have them picking up back-to-back wins following this period. In Week 8, I have them beating the Falcons, followed by a bit of a surprising win against the Steelers in Week 9. Don't get me wrong, there is talent on this Tennessee team, but they won't win consistently. I think a game like this against the Steelers, though, is a tough one they could win. The Titans then go on a losing streak, taking losses to the Buccaneers, a team they should beat, but I've also got them losing to the Jaguars, Panthers, Colts, and Dolphins. I think the only other team that they should beat among those that I just listed is the Colts, but I feel like they will split with Indianapolis this season. In Week 15, they finally snag a win against the Texans, but then take a loss to the Seahawks. In their rematch against the Texans in Week 17, I have the Titans taking a loss, but to close out the season, I think they can get an upset win against the Jaguars, playing at home here in Week 18. And with that, the Tennessee Titans would be finishing with a record consisting of just 6 wins and 11 losses. Not ideal, and potentially a surprise for a lot of people who think that Tennessee is still a contender. I just doubt, in all honesty. I'm not a believer in this team. Their schedule is a little bit tough, and potentially they could win as many as 8 games, but I just don't see them pushing themselves to a winning season. This team should have entered a rebuild, and I don't think they're ready for the playoffs in 2023, even with DeAndre Hopkins. That we have not only covered every team in the AFC South for 2023, but every team in the NFL. If you happen to miss an episode of the show, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube, The Sideline Sizzle, or go to our website at thesidelinessizzle.com. The final standings for the AFC South will put the Jaguars in first place, followed by either the Titans or Colts. A bit of a tiebreaker is necessary there, and the Texans would come in last place. This could be the weakest division in football, with the Jaguars pleasantly sitting on top. Again, if you'd like to check out some of my other predictions for 2023, check out our website at thesidelinessizzle.com. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Sideline Sizzle, brought to you by the City of Conway Parks and Recreation Department. We'll catch you next week.